she called me and asked me to come and talk about mysticism, one of the subjects that is very close to my heart. And so I took like the 25, 30 books that I have on various aspects of mysticism, including Persian poetry, of Rumi and Hafez and Attar and Samai, and a lot of mystic writings from Turkey, where Rumi resided for most of his life, and developed this idea of mysticism and Sufism. So a number of books on Sufism, and then the mystic art of the Middle Ages and the mystic music of the Middle Ages and beyond, and all of that. And I put them all on my desk in front of my library, and I started reflecting on them for a number of days, as to just remembering the things I'd read in the past 25, 30, 35 years, and reflected on them for a while before I could put together my thoughts on the subject. But then I was a little at awe, not so much for talking about mysticism and Sufism, but for the fact that at least for the next 2 months until I come here to be in your presence, I have to behave like a mystic. That was the hard part. And maybe because I wasn't so much aware of it, before then, I thought I'm doing okay. But from that point on, I became more aware as to what a mystic is, and how a mystic should live, and how a mystic should behave. And I have to confess, although in Baha'i faith you don't have confession, that I did not do as best as I thought I would be able to do, at least for 2 months. It's not that easy. I should tell you before I go to the subject and tell you from what I read, what I think I know, what mystic and mysticism is, that my father and my mother, I should say, and my grandfather and my mother, I would consider them as mystics. And so in this period of the 2 months of reflection, I also thought about them, about their lives and their lifestyle, and why I want to remember them as mystics of the past generation. Again, before I start talking about the topic, I want to share with you a passage from one of the, although next week I'll be talking about poetry and art and mysticism. But today, I just want to show you one passage from one of the beautiful poems of Rumi that I think perhaps all the Persians in the audience remember. That's the first passage in the Masnavi of Rumi. What is it? Bishnu az ney chun hikayat mikonad az judai ha shikayat. So we all remember that passage. But the next thing is that Persian poetry is beautiful. It provides a healing kind of a feeling to you, and it calms you down, and it brings a feeling of ecstasy and love and harmony and unity, and you name it. It just brings you, it elevates you to a high level. If you really are into Persian poetry, good Persian poetry, mystic Persian poetry. But then the problem is that it is so beautiful and so enchanting that many times we Persians, when we read it, we don't really reflect on it and ponder on it, or even think about the meaning of it. So let me take the risk, well, you guys take the risk, as to, if you can say in 15 seconds, those of you understood what these words were, as to what Rumi meant by Vishnu az ney chun hikayat mikonad az judai ha shikayat mikonad. He says, basically in this poem, he says that a craftsman, that craftsman being God, pulled the reed. Do you know what reed is? Everyone knows what reed is? Reed is just stem of the sugar cane. Sugar cane. So he says that a craftsman pull the reed from the reed bed. I didn't have a reed, so I brought something. We pretend it's a reed. Think of it as a reed. It works, right? So a craftsman pulled the reed from the reed bed, cut holes in it. What are the holes? We'll just talk about some of them. Eyes and nose and lips, and the rest. These are the holes through which we live and through which we breathe, through which we see, ear and all the rest of it, right? And here, so a craftsman pulled the reed from the reed bed, cut holes in it, and called it a human being. From then, it has been wailing in agony. It has been wailing in agony, waiting for the ultimate reunion. So what he says is that we are just like that reed which has been cut off from the stem. And so because it has been cut off in that sense, it's dying until we die. We think we die, but then we live. A few weeks ago we had a celebration. Most people, when somebody dies, they mourn, right? But a friend of mine that invited me to talk said that I want you could you talk about ecstasy and love and the beauty of dying? So that's what I started with. We are away and we need to connect. What is mysticism? This is the key question. Mysticism is defined by many as searching for the divine unencumbered. Searching for the divine unencumbered. Which, you know what it means, but for my own clarification, I say that every moment that I live, every moment that I wake up, every moment that I walk, that I talk, I'm thinking about who I am, who I really am. Am I part of God? Or am I just somebody who is here and every day I'm waking up saying that, how much more property should I have and how many more houses should I have and how much more should I make and therefore how many new cars should I have and this and that. Am I this or am I that? Or am I the combination? So a mystic says, no, we're that. We are from God. And that every moment of our life, we need to think of that. Everything else is secondary. That's why a lot of mystics, particularly the mystics of the East, they just get fed up with all the clothes and all the shoes and all the dresses and all the purse and cars and this and that, and they just give it up. And they go to mountains, right? They go to mountains and to forests, and they just want to search God and to make the connection. So they, in effect, they want to become poor in things and rich in God. Now, those of us who have been on the path of wealth accumulation for the sake of wealth accumulation, if we accumulate wealth in order to create jobs, if we accumulate wealth in order to help the poor, if we accumulate wealth to be kind and generous, that's something. But otherwise, that is absolute degradation. The Prophet Muhammad of Islam says, Dunan ibadillahu, jama'an mawla ba'dada. The worst of people, the worst of all people, are those who accumulate wealth for the sake of accumulating wealth, and then don't do any good on it, on earth. So that's what everybody then understands what mystics mean by mysticism. Searching for the divine unencumbered. In another way, the music is fine. Somebody says turn it off, but sometimes the music comes on and so we wake up. So another mystic explained mysticism in this format, that it is the idea of putting into practice the idea of man is made in the image of God. You know, we all read about it in the Bible, in Baha'i writings, the hidden words, right? Man is made in the image of God. Mystics say, let us put it into practice. Easier said than done, right? Easier said than done. But mystics are those who believe that Jesus and Baha'u'llah and Buddha and all the rest, when they talk about man is made in the image of God, it just wasn't a sentence. They meant it. They meant that we are from God, and to Him we should return, and so because we have to behave like God. We have to internalize what? The attributes of God, right? We have to internalize all the attributes of God. So this is, again, easier said than done. So at least in this next hour that we're together, not that I have it, but now that I reflected for 2 more months on this idea, I said, just imagine what a good guy I would have been if at the age of 7 I had started this. Of course, we go to Baha'i Friday class in Iran and Sunday class here. I don't know how we're going to do it here, but we did it very systematically for 12 years. And then we had systematic 4 years of so-called Baha'i college, 16 years. You know, and I went through all that, but then, it wasn't now that in reflection, in retrospect, I look at it and say, was it developed into the life of a mystic? No, I wasn't. Of course, 99% of it I know it's my fault. But then perhaps there's the 1% that always can think in terms of our curriculum, on what we convey to our children, how we deal with them on this path of God, and on this path of going toward God and becoming part of God and being part of God. Perhaps there's a 1% that we can learn from some of the things that I'm sharing with you. I'm going to share with you I've written just 8 or 9 items here. I don't know how many of them we can talk about them, but I'll just do 1 or 2 more, and then I'll ask for a little conversation, not too long, 3-4 minutes, then I'll go to the second part. So the second question I raised here is what are the mystics called? In different religions, they give them different names. Mystics. I don't know if they want to be called. Some of them want to be called by those names, but for the most part, they want to dwell on the practice of mysticism, and so much on the name of mystic and who they are. So, does anyone know the mystics among Jews, who they're called? Kaballah. So the group or Kabbalahs are the mystic Jews. And Christians?
Gnostics.
Gnostics. Christians, Gnostics. Hindus? Maybe what I saw is what they write about, it's called Vedanta. I don't know if you've heard of them. And Muslims? Of course. Sufis. Muslims or Sufis. I don't know whether it's because of my limited background or that's what it is. The mysticism really developed during the 11th, 12th, 13th century in the Middle East. In the true sense of the word, the way I see it, from what I've read. and they are the true mystics. And of course, then coming to our contemporary period, we also have what's called the New Age religions. New Age religions. They are, in a way, mystics. And I remember from some of the talks of Baha'i, he talked to Theosophists groups, right? They're also kind of mystics. So why are they all? Why do we group them all and call them mystics? Because they're all in search of divine, in their own way, you know. And so this New Age group, some of them just get together and read poetry. Some of them get together and dance. Some of them get together and just do yoga, right? Some of them get together and work on animal rights, on world peace, on Amnesty International, on UNICEF. Right? We call them all mystics. Why? Because in one way or another, they're all in search of the divine. A lot of them could be called atheists. Let's think again when we talk about atheists. Search of the divine. It isn't a search of God in that sense. Search of the divine, search of the absolute. Search of the absolute. Sometimes we become, a word becomes a limitation. God. This guy doesn't know God, so he's atheist. He's a bad guy, I'm the good guy, right? Mystics do not see it this way. Mystics search for harmony. That's what you Baha'i say, right? But are we having become a true mystic? A true mystic of seeing absolute unity of this beautiful, amazing universe. And are we doing something about it? So Sufi has two missions. His first mission is to search for the divine and reach it. Another way that they explain Sufis is, mystics, is that mystics are impatient. Most of us are patient people. Say, okay, if there's God, we go, we die, and we'll just see what happens. But the mystics are impatient. The soonest I understand that they're mystics, they want to reach the divine. They give everything to reach the divine. As I said, the wealth and all of that is nothing. What they give is also, they want to suffer. You've all heard about suffering, right? Anyone of us want to suffer? We love to suffer? No, nobody loves to suffer? No? Gary seems like none of you guys? No?
Not intentionally.
Not intentionally? Okay. Well, I wanted to talk, let me talk about this suffering part, and then we'll break for 2-3 minutes. The suffering that I think most of us think about, Buddha says suffer, and Jesus says suffer, and Muhammad says suffer, Baha'i says suffer. We probably have the wrong perception of that, what suffering is, and that what suffering is. Now, in this whole process of reaching the divine and reaching the absolute, what are we in effect inferring to? We're inferring the dual nature of man that Baha'i has talked about, and many other religions have talked about. What is this dual nature of man?
Spiritual.
Animal and the spiritual, the lower and the higher, right? All of that. So, the suffering is going from the animal to the divine. That is an aware suffering. That's not a suffering that if we can help it, I won't suffer. That's a suffering that is I want to suffer to reach the divine. I want to get out of my animalistic behaviors, which is too much passion for things, too much passion for material things, too much passion for, going always to parties of different kinds. Let me be free and drink and have a good time and this and that. Now, if you can restrain yourself from all of that, then we are on the path to God, right? But then and that is an aware suffering. We want to do it because, now, of course, when we get up and we want to spend 5 minutes reading a prayer that Baha'i wants us to do, and then another 5 minutes at night to read the prayer, and perhaps an hour or two to reflect on the holy writings, in effect, we said I could have gone and, earned $50, and I'm just doing this. And sometimes it brings you sadness that you're not there. I want to be there, I'm not there. This is a suffering. But this is an aware suffering, asking God, help me to be who I really am, right? I'm part of God, and I want to be part of God. So that's an aware suffering. So I hope I also leave you with this thought of the dual nature of man, the lower side and the higher side, also takes this aware suffering to get there. Without that pain, you will not have that gain. It has to be consistent, daily basis. And because we are this two-natured man, it is for the rest of our lives. But every account each day before thou art summoned to reckoning, Baha'i says, if you don't do it on a daily basis, my background is accounting. Sometimes when I'm aware of it, I have this ledger in front of me, all the bad things, all the good things. And many days I don't have a lot of things on the good things, good part. But this awareness, it's just a suffering. I'm looking at myself, so many bad things I've done. These 2 past months my wife is not here, but so many times that I have bothered her and I didn't really mean to, but the past 2 months I've been aware of it. I'm aware of it. No, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have hurt her, right? This is suffering. But that's suffering for a better cause. But I hope that we leave here with the thought that suffering really does not mean causing pain for yourself, or cutting a finger, or things of that nature which is suffering, or any kind of suffering, just bothering yourself, or bothering, or hurting yourself in some ways, or even not eating unnecessarily. I want to suffer. This is an aware suffering that you want to have that suffering, like that exercise, or like that exercise of the mind, the healing of the mind from all the filth and dirt through reading the holy writings. It is this kind of suffering. Sometimes it brings sadness that you're not where you want to be, but it provides you an awareness as to the path and the route that you're going. So in effect, of course, the end result is definitely joyous, but in the process also, when you think, for example, that, I've hoarded this much money, and so what am I going to do with it? And you reflect on it. And am I going to give part of it to the Baha'i Center? Am I going to, just this Christmas or this year, just go to the House of the Aged or the Atlanta Food Bank, where particularly in this recession, so many people are dying, are actually dying of hunger and homelessness and this and that. You're giving up something and it bothers you a little bit, but a lot of it is joy. It brings you inner joy in a way that you could not imagine. Even though in the beginning of it is a little hurtful maybe. I had 200,000 now, I'm giving 50,000 of it. But then in the process it becomes joyful, right? That's what you're saying. Let me just move on and say a few other things that I think are important to share in this context. Well, we refer to this two sides of man and woman, right? The lower side and the higher side. Again, I think I want to give you perhaps a little opening, a different perception, so that we don't belittle and we don't say so many bad things about the lower side. We have learned to say all the bad things about the lower side to the extent that we have it and we don't admit it. We have it, but we pretend we don't have it, right? We have it, and then you also hurt yourself. Why do I have it? Well, you're a human being. what is that lower side? That lower side is not, we explain animal, but that animal means the things that we need to survive. When you think about security, clothing, eating, having a shelter, protecting yourself, that's all the lower side. That's all the so-called animal side, right? It's all necessary. But if you dwell on it, say this is what life is, that's the end of it, right? So the point is that we all have it. And we all need to celebrate it. But then you should not dwell on it. You should know that that is part of it. Now this is the, man is a contradiction. We are a contradiction. And we have to live with it, right? And then we need to be aware of it. And I said we have to encourage it. This is what I've learned in my studies from one fascinating professor of philosophy in California, Professor Jacob Needleman, who talked about this fact that man is a contradiction. And this idea of this suffering should be an aware suffering. And also the fact that that we should not belittle this lower side. And the fact that we should encourage our children in that process. And what he was talking about was this, that if we suffocate this idea of children asking questions, this idea of children having these two sides and not being able to deal with it, and many of us do not know how to deal with it. Then he has a wonderful theory. He says, what do you think the result would be? If your child says, who is God? And I tell him that God is God, and you have to listen to your parents, and you have to listen to your pastor, and God is there, and you have to obey it. Right? That's how a lot of us are trained to deal with those kind of questions, right? What is, the child says that, why do good people suffer? Maybe the teenager would ask, not the little child. Why do good people suffer? Why do bad people dominate this world? Why do good people, why do we have to live and then die? And what is the purpose of life? And how do we respond to these questions? How do we respond to these questions? Many times, many of us suffocate those questions, in effect, or don't want to deal with it. Because our parents have not dealt with it either. So we don't really deal with it. And then Needleman's conclusion in this regard is that, based on his research, a lot of his research writing and dealing with people, is that the result, and listen to this, is fanaticism and superstitions and dogmas and prejudice and what do you call it, schizophrenia? People who have, one side that says he goes to church, one side, is a pastor and a Bible preacher, and then the other side he goes and does all those bad things. Hypocrite in that sense. But a lot of them don't really mean to be that way, but this is the two sides which has not been totally analyzed, and they have not become merged into one personality. And a lot of it have a little bit one way or another, right? So what he's suggesting is that is the result. And he says that all the wars and animosities in the world is because our two sides are still in conflict. It has not become unified. And so that's how the world is. And so his suggestion is that we should develop our children into mystics, which means we have to deal with those questions ourselves, and we have to deal with them. And then if we do this, then the world will be a different world. There'll be a lot less prejudice and superstitions and dogmas. And a lot less people will say, this is so because my father said so, because my pastor said so, or because, that's the way it is. So ultimately it comes to this point of knowing ourselves. A mystic more than anything else, wants to deal with the question of understanding himself and herself, and then dealing with it, and then trying to help others in that path. So here comes to this that I have, the list of mystics' practices. The list of mystics' practices. Now next week we'll talk about mystic poetry and art, and then the following week, mysticism in the Baha'i faith. But then a lot of these things apply. Also, I should have said that one thing you find about mystics is that mystics gradually they achieve what Baha'is want to achieve, which means whether they call Kaballah or Sufi or Vedanta or whatever, they have a religious background and tradition, but ultimately they come to that absolute unity because they see the harmony and oneness of God, and therefore religion and humanity and the purpose of life on earth, which is service to the humankind. They come to that conclusion through awareness and absolute daily practice. So what is this daily practice? This is the best from all these 30 books and elsewhere that I could put together. This is what I saw to be the practice of a true mystic. Tawbah, which is repentance. God forgive me for all the bad things that I've done, and all the bad things that I continue to do. But God, I'm repenting, and I really want to be good. I really want to be good. I want to be better. Muhasabah. Self-criticism. There's nobody better judged than ourselves. We may pretend to be this and that, but we can't fool ourselves, right? So in our own backyard, in our own room, we sit down and pray, and we self-criticize. Who am I? Where have I been? Where do I stand right now? And then how can I be better? And how can I counter these things? Self-criticism. Tafakkur, reflection. You remember that passage from Iran? Baha'u'llah says, an hour of reflection is better than 70 years of pious worship. An hour of reflection is better than 70 years of pious worship. You know, how many days pass by and we do read our prayers, but okay, well, I've done my job. Read my prayer, we're closed, put on pocket, move on to my job or wherever I want to go. Right? You do 7 years of it, Baha'u'llah says no good. If you haven't reflected on it. That's what reflection is. Who am I? Where have I been? Where am I going? Am I getting closer to God? So mystics do it. Reflection. Daily reflection and pondering. Pondering is very important. We call this farar, which means that getting away and fleeing from everything and sheltering in God. Sheltering in God. God, you are my shelter. You are my support. And I trust you and therefore guide me. And that's what they have come up with in terms of a practice tool for themselves. I hope everybody had a pen and pencil like some of those friends that do, but not that I'm saying it. These are really lessons for life. You know, I taught for 30 years and sometimes I shared some of these things and for which they took me to the dean's office. You're supposed to be accounting, why are you talking about these things? Many times. You know, I got bad evaluations. Why are you talking about these things? This has nothing to do with accounting. And I said it has a lot to do with accounting. Look at Enron. Look at all those companies. Look at Arthur Anderson with the highest top paid accountants, some of them were paid $200,000-300,000 a year. See what they did, right? Look at the economy today, all these bankers, all these fools on Wall Street, right? That was usually my response to them. Whenever I went to the dean's office, sometimes to the president's office, we talked about these things, and that was a good debate on the purpose of education, the meaning of education, and how badly we are cheated from what true education is that Kaballah tells us. Read parish talks. Kaballah tells us that true education has to be combined with the spiritual education. Without it, it's of little use. Next one says, Maqam. State of inner self. Again, in what state am I? In what condition am I? Who am I? And the question of qalb, a lot of hidden words deals with that question. Pure heart. Possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, right? That thine may be a sovereignty ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. Right? Many times when we think we have become intelligent, it's all here. But Baha'i puts us in our place in so many different ways. It's just put aside. Sanctify your souls from all of that. Think about this heart. Do you have a pure heart, right? That is first and foremost. I'm so sorry that some of the friends don't sit back there, but we still have seats before us. Not my fault. It says hosn. Suffering, the issue of suffering, that rare suffering, which sometimes brings sorrow, but that's okay. I'm sorry, I'll do better. Sometimes you may cry because of it, right? That crying is good. It brings you to the station of awareness, and purity. Those tears, a lot of times a tear for the better. Hope, fear. Of course, we particularly the Baha'is are trained for God is love and the love of God and all of that, and we shouldn't fear God. But there are many passages more in other religions and some in ours that we should also have the fear of God. Right? We have to have the fear of God. And fear His justice, if we do a lot of bad things. But this is for the third session, but Baha'u'llah says in the Seven Valleys that some may reach that divine in a second. And for others, what? It may take hundreds of thousands of years. It says hundreds of thousands of years. In the Baha'i faith, we don't have that heaven and hell and burning fire and, beautiful garden, this and that. No, this is for when we were children, we have those things, right? Heaven is being close to God and hell is being away from God. And he says with that kind of behavior, it would be hundreds of thousands of years, it would be away from, it would be in darkness in effect. Hope, and then khashiyat, which is together with that reverence, and then this is reverence and renunciation of the word. I'm just going one line, so let me go back up. Hope was fear of God. Khashiyat is a little softer perhaps from hope, but that is also reverence. You come to a point that you really obey your master, or really you love this teacher. You develop more than a fear, you develop a reverence, right? You bow your head down to that master of the universe, to the beauty of Baha'u'llah's writings, and accept him as the manifestation of God for this age, right? That develops that absolute reverence, right? So, renouncing the world, right? That you come to that point that you renounce a lot of things that occupy you on a daily basis. Taqwa, which is along the line of the same thing, but more in line of what is called abiding in God. Now you have developed this fear, and reverence, and then you abide by his instructions. Now this is a sort of a systematic process for purification of self. See, that lower self we were talking about. So they have it's a masterpiece, really, when you think about the mystic way. We have a lot of it in Baha'i faith as well, but this is sort of systematic. Vara, abstinence. Then when you reach this point, then they don't have to tell you not to drink. They don't have to tell you not to gamble. You just abstain from it. That becomes your second nature. That becomes part of you, right? So the next thing is muraqabat. You talked about that other aspect, which is a little lighter. But this is what's called self-supervision. You get self-criticism and constant self-supervision. The way we supervise our kids, now I'm supervising myself. That's what I tried to do in the last 2 months. It was tough. And I failed. But it was a path forward. So, Gene, thank you. I'll try better. So, then it says, ikhlas, that's purity of intention. You purify yourself, and then whatever you say and what you do, you really mean it. And it's, your intention also has purified. Next one is istiqamat, perseverance on this path. Many times we give up. I was ready to give up after 2 months. But perseverance on a daily basis, just imagine I have this list in front of me, and on a daily basis I supervise and criticize and assess and work on this path. Tawakkul. It's hard, it's suffering, aware of suffering, but I rely on God. You develop that reliance. It's not anymore talking about I rely on God, but I rely on Him because now that lower side is being absorbed, is being minimized, and I can stand up more erect and more aware, and therefore I can have more true reliance on God. And then he talks about taslim, or surrender. And we see a lot of taslim in Islamic tradition, that when you go through all this practice, you totally surrender in God. His will is His will. I don't go and pray anymore, God, give me a better house, don't bring me sickness, and this and that. I tell Him that whatever is your wish is my wish, right? I totally surrender. Surrendering God. That's an amazing state to get together. Then you reach the point of tafwiz, or commitment. I'm not committed. I've surrendered, and I'm committed to be on this path. Taqa is confidence. Then you reach the point of confidence, as Baha'u'llah says, certitude. And we have the book of certitude, right? We have the book of certitude. So, all of this, nice and fine and good and dandy, but I'm still going to use the last 5 minutes. I'm sorry that you got a little tired, but this is good stuff just to have. Now we come to the result. If I do all of these, what is the result? The result, first and foremost, for a Sufi and for a Baha'i, is a mystic, is service. Baha'u'llah tells us. Baha'u'llah says the definition of a human being is one. Baha'u'llah says a human being is one who dedicates himself to the service of the humankind. That's ultimately what a mystic reaches. That, okay, I've done all this, but what good does it do? What's doing? Of course, some mystics are badly mistaken by going to a monastery or someplace to serve God, but they just want to be there in order to pray all their lives. Baha'u'llah doesn't like it. We'll talk about it. Baha'u'llah says we have a faith of moderation, right? A faith of balance. We don't want to go extreme in any way, even in those kind of things. So we'll go back to this, but I'll just read for you this part because our time is coming to an end. The result of this life of service is that it develops in us these attributes or these virtues of humility, modesty, generosity, trustworthiness. If I had all of these things, I would be a prophet of God. But God actually, mystics say, if I have all of these things, then I'm becoming merged in God, one with God. Because this is what God, we don't know what God is, but we know that these are attributes of God, right? Doesn't hurt to read again. Humility and modesty and generosity, trustworthiness, self-restraint, perfect goodness, serenity, certainty, poor and rich. What this means, poor in everything, but rich in God. When many people say that you have God, you have everything, right? This is a true awareness that we have reached that point. And kindness, and love, and ecstasy. Now they say that these absolute Sufis and mystics are mad in a way. You've heard of Sufi dervishes, right, who are in the desert in search of God. So this is an absolute love and ecstasy. And then you reach a point of attraction. You're attracted to God, and also you attract because of having developed those virtues. But finally, the last step is what Baha'i says in the Seven Valley is what?
True poverty and absolute nothingness.
True poverty and absolute nothingness. That is where you become like a speck of dust, like a drop of water, but in that ocean of mercy. Thank you for listening.